George Orwell's 1984 rulers were in charge, but they were kind of sex-obsessed hall monitors. That's a little bit of a preview of it, which will be premiering tomorrow. We'll also have Susanna Lang on to talk about it. See you then. That's Interesting is available wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back to News Flash, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. As I was listening to that, I did kind of realize that I have not yet set that up for production. I've not set that up to release that episode, which is it's supposed to be releasing in 1 minute, because it was Thursday when we started the show, and it will be Friday when we finish the show. So we should have an episode out for you, but we will be releasing it. I will be putting that up there direct as soon as we finish the show. It's going to be a very, very fun episode talking with Susanna Lang about the show Too Hot to Handle on Netflix. And boy, it is a crazy, crazy show. I'm going to give my takes on it. She's going to give hers. And it was a real pleasure to talk to her as we finish out our 8-week season. Move into turn the page with another chapter. All right. We're talking about this article here in the Discourse blog, and the idea of what do we do now. I think it's a very interesting thing, and I did want to kind of break into what Paul Blest had to say on the matter. He writes, Raleigh, where he's from, Raleigh, North Carolina, isn't a radical city, at least not in the way nearby Durham or Greensboro or even Asheville are. But a switch has flipped on in this place, like most others around the country in the wake of the killings of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and Breonna Taylor, we cannot forget, in Louisville, and Tony McDade in Tallahassee. It's partially because Raleigh, like every other city in the country, has its own unfinished business with police. It is like they haven't been entirely smooth throughout this situation. Like, it's something that a lot of people, especially people of color and especially poor people, probably more people of color, would have a pretty darn good idea of. So it kind of shows you, like, that is a big part of some of the grievances that I think they have and that they're carrying into these protests. I think it's really well founded, and it shows you that there is a real, like, widespread appeal and real widespread pull in this situation. And the wounds go back decades. They were never attended to, just left to scab over until they reopen when another senseless death at the hands of the police occurs. Akil Jenkins was 24 years old when he was shot and killed by a Raleigh police officer, D.C. Twitty, I can't believe this real name, in February of 2016. I had just been hired in the Triangle area alt weekly Indie Week and was at the scene about an hour later and spent the next week talking to his neighbors, activists, the cops, and whoever else I could try to make some semblance of why he was dead. Twitty said he saw Jenkins reaching for a handgun. Practically everyone I talked to told me Twitty shot Jenkins in the back. So it kind of shows you, like, these are the things that they're just so easily able to get away with. And I heard it from a really great point. It was kind of similar to the Me Too movement, the fact that in Hollywood, all these powerful men kind of pushing and thinking like they get away with anything. It was actually my brother said that. So shout out to him, but it was a very, very good point, and it shows you that this is the kind of impunity that they act with. Over the past several days, I've seen more than one sign in Raleigh honoring Akil Jenkins. As I write, this rally just finished its fourth night of protests with hundreds of people proudly defying the mayor's 8 p.m. curfew to peacefully march through downtown. Earlier, a protest organized by a local activist group, the Raleigh Police Accountability Community Task Force. Jenkins' mother, Rolanda Bird, now serves as the group's executive director, drew what looked to be at least 1,000 people, if not more. Some of this feels familiar, but the difference is from the past protests in Raleigh, those following Jenkins' death in the anti-trans HB2 bill, the moral marches I've attended over the past few years is palpable. It raises the question, what is happening and why now and what's next? Akil Jenkins has not been the only person to have been killed by the Raleigh police officers. In March, protests erupted after a 26-year-old Javier Torres was shot and wounded by a Raleigh police officer, with demonstrators going to police chief Cassandra Deck Brown's house. And of course, there's other incidents where a mentally ill man, Sohail Moharred, was shot and killed by a Raleigh police officer whose body camera, of course, that's a classic, was not turned on. So, yeah. It's really the question is why now? To start, the intensity of these protests is not something that I've seen here before, is what Paul Bless writes. And really, I think it's a broad case for anywhere. We have not seen protests like this in a very, very long time. After 2 nights of cops firing tear gas at protests, followed by rounds of property damage to some downtown businesses and a couple of malls in other parts of the city, the National Guard was called in and the mayor instituted a curfew. But the obvious answer is that we have reached a boiling point. Shit is rolling downhill very fast, and that's very, very true. I think COVID, definitely has to, and the fact not necessarily with the disease, but the fact of being cooped up inside, and the fact that how hard black people have been hit by this virus is starting to take a toll. More than 40 million people, and just generally America, life does kind of suck for a lot of people right now. More than 40 million people have filed unemployment claims in the past 2.5 months. COVID cases are still rising as many states have reopened, forcing a mostly working class people, African American people, back into unsafe workplace conditions. Trusting government was at historic lows well before all this happened. One can only imagine how bad the floor might be now. And that's kind of why it is happening. And he finishes at around 8:30 p.m. during Tuesday's protests, half an hour after the curfew had begun, and 15 minutes before the police began announcing that they would arrest people who didn't disperse. A young person who seemed to be leading the group held the megaphone, looking around for what was next. I'm not even the leader of this. I just came up here, they admitted. So what do we do now? I think that's the big question. The second part of this that not really many people have been able to answer yet. Yeah. Here's a fun one. Let's talk about the brands. I love laughing at the brands, right? Heaven helped the people tasked with creating the corporate response to a nationwide uprising against the systematic murder of black people by police. People are on the march everywhere, and now our brands are very eager to let you know that they are on some kind of march too. We got from L'Oreal Paris to Grindr. Every Disney property and companies are sharing messages about people coming together to stand and speak out for black people. There haven't been many messages against why black people need solidarity. A really deep message is talking about the role the police play in this, and like just the idea that we stand together because we're generally getting the sense that you guys like this side more than this side. So we're going to release a vague statement in support of it so we don't piss off the people on the other side. That's essentially what this is. Some have stronger or at least more apologetic messaging than others. We have Grindr, for instance, announcing it was moving all of its racist ethnicity filter from its app after years of criticism. But they are overall the same. Nearly every single one of them contains the white words with a white logo on a black background, or in some cases, no logo at all. For example, Star Wars is on Twitter said, "We stand against racism." That's good. I really hope he wouldn't stand for it. I don't think the cops are even going to come out and say, yeah, we stand for racism. We stand for inclusion, so that's all kind of the same thing there. We stand with our fellow black employees, storytellers, creators, and the entire black community. We must unite and speak out. Yeah, it is the really kind of interesting why this kind of happened. This is Amazon, the inequitable and brutal treatment of black people in our country must stop. Together, we stand in solidarity with the black community, our employees, customers, and partners, and the fight against systemic and racism and injustice. Of course, never going to be paying them a living wage, obviously. Garfield Eats, the app with a tweet, Square, Nike. The party continues on a Twitter thread done by Gene Demby, who is the co-host of the podcast Code Switch, who collected a series of bad brand messages about racism and diversity and other non-related, non-race-specific buzzwords, and just kind of being like, we are standing together to talk about speaking out, to think about joining the fight, to stop the bad treatment and start the good treatment. Because in the words of people imitating the DNC chair, Tom Perez, we are for good things and against bad things. That's pretty much the brand position. Because they cannot really go any further. They can't really push it because they're obviously doing owing to the dictations of the system, they are not going to be really able to push that much harder. We know how the brands are handling this. How is the media handling this? We will tell you in a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot thank you enough for listening to programming from the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. It really means a lot. So if you like what you're hearing, please consider supporting us by checking out our merch store available on Spreaker.com/TSWS. The link for it is there. Also, if you like what you're hearing, feel free to leave us a review on wherever or however you listen. You can do it on Spreaker by leaving a positive comment, and of course on iTunes by rating and reviewing us 5 stars, and on whatever possible program or site that you listen to SWRN on. Leave a nice review, leave a good comment, let us know your feedback, and also if it's negative too, I always welcome constructive feedback. Thank you so much for listening, and now let's get back to your show. Welcome back to Newsflash. We still do have a little bit of time with you here today. We're still keeping you here. And of course, we're going to be talking about the media. How are they? That's the real question, I think. How are they going to be handling these protests? How will they be dealing with them? That is the real question. And what are they going to be doing to cover them? Whose voices will they amplify? Let's find out. I can't wait. But of course, we're going to first give a little bit of literature a lesson, and really in something called the passive voice. For example, take this New York Times tweet. Minneapolis, a photographer was shot in the eye. That sounds bad. Washington, D.C. Protesters struck a journalist with his own microphone. That sounds bad. These protesters are really bad, right? Like, the protesters here, we can see, they clearly did the violence. Louisville, a reporter was hit by a pepper ball on live television by an officer who appeared to be aiming at her. Really? Appeared? Like that you can tell what you can kind of tell of hopefully where I'm going with this, like the fact that like the media, which is such a big deal, it's such a big pipeline into people's heads, especially people who would probably be the most persuadable to take a more radical stance than before on this movement, just based on the fact that reality is playing out right in front of their eyes. They're being told in this kind of BS passive voice that the only people that can cause any violence and have them be named in the assessment of the violence in the papers is the protesters. Only the protesters can do that. If the police did that, it would be a journalist was struck in the eye with his own microphone. But again, how was the photographer shot? Who was shot? Who shot the photographer? It's a mystery. It's a board game. Like, not really. It was a police officer, as you can tell. WUSA described a scene of tear gas being deployed in flashbangs and relatively peaceful demonstrators in Washington, D.C. WUSA 9. Breaking pepper spray caused a short stampede in Lafayette Park during a peaceful march honoring George Floyd. Pepper spray caused a short stampede. This is just absolutely, like, you cannot get, like, George Orwell is just being ripped off. Again, part of reality here. I hate to be this kind of guy and bring up George Orwell twice in a show. But, like, look at what's happening here. Look at what is happening. Of course, the pepper spray, I don't know if you're aware, it's an inanimate object. It lacks the agency or ability to spray itself. But the use of the passive voice was not limited to the social media copy. There are some others. Tear gas has been deployed where protesters remain. Tear gas is being deployed. Oh, no. After being hit with tear gas, Matt Gregory and his crew say they're doing better after protesters put milk in his eyes. They just got hit with, like, it's like they act like, again, this is the problem with it, and it's such a manipulative, deceitful way of doing it, and it's so small, and, like, so few people actually notice. Like, who threw that tear gas? Who was the person that threw that out there, and what was the group doing it? And then, of course, we talk about the protesters because they actually did something good. Like, they actually helped. And the police were the ones, of course, causing all the problems. They were tear gassed on live TV while reporting the scene of the protest. Matt Greger and photographer James Hash.